Thanks everybody for coming along tonight. It's always good to have a nice crowd at the ASBN events. The house that you see there is a culmination of a lot of years of different things in my life and my partner's life. And if you go on the philosophy of the Alice in Wonderland saying who said that begin at the beginning, and beginning at the beginning is a hard thing to do because it goes back a long period of time. And due to doing this presentation, I had to think about where it was that begin at the beginning really was for me in regards to building this home, because the sustainable aspects of the home kind of reflect a lot of things in our lives as well. So when I thought about it, there was a book I read, and it was way back in about 1987, and it wasn't a building book, it was a book on growing fruit and vegetables. It was an American book. And it was the first time that I'd ever really seen a list of all of the chemicals that were available to spray on plants that were legal, with apples being the main culprit, with about 80 different chemicals could be sprayed on them. And so from being a person who definitely didn't want to grow anything, I kind of went down the whole route of growing things for myself from that period of time. And it was through growing things for myself that I came across the concept of permaculture. And so that was really the beginning for me, was going through that whole permaculture thing. And when I met Pam, she was interested in growing as well, so we looked for a block of land that was available at the time. And this is going back to the late 1990s when we bought the block of land. And at that time it was, it seems like quite a steal. It was about 15,000 for an acre of land in the Barossa Valley. And as everybody knows, 2002 came along and 15,000 was no longer available, but that's what it was at the time. So the philosophy that everybody hears about to do with Lao Tzu is to do with the start of a journey. It takes one step to start a journey, but the other part of that saying is that a tower 9 stories high starts with a single brick. And so that has much application to the building of projects. So the 3 principles of permaculture are that you care of the earth, the care of people that you know and other people that you don't know, so where you buy your products from, and the ability to share whatever you have in excess with other people. And although it's mainly applied in many people's minds to a gardening perspective, it also has much bigger emphasis on other parts of your life. So David Holmgren is one of the co-designers of the permaculture principle, and he extrapolated all those 3 there to things that you will put into your life. And so many of them have an impact on how you build your homes, and so many of them have an impact that you just see how bad homes are that are built in the main because they don't have anything. So if you observe and interact, you learn about how positioning your home on the block is going to be best served for where your block is. If you can catch and store energy, you can utilise the sun, you can utilise the rainfall, you can utilise the wind. On our particular parcel of land, because we've got about an acre all up, we can obtain a yield from that. So in the first 10 years that we had it, we just created an orchard and vegetable gardens there as well. Use and value renewable resources and services, so it's what you can do on that, what you can do when you're creating your house. And although there's not a great deal of renewable resources, things that were created in the house, there is a lot of reuse of materials as much as possible. And the producing no waste philosophy, which is so kind of anti-society at the moment. We tend to be stuck in the recycling model, and that's about as far as it goes. So there you've got design from patterns to details, so you have the overall concept of what your house needs to be, and then you split it up into how it's going to look from the inside out. Integrate rather than segregate. We didn't want the house to be separate from the garden, so although it's at the back of the block to keep us furthest away from the main road, it is still part of that landscape, with the collection of rainwater being valuable in that part there. Use and value diversity can have many aspects. It can be advice that you get, it can be materials that you use, and use of edge and value the marginal is one of the things that permaculture is renowned for, utilising that edge space between 2 areas that gives you the best yield. And then of course with regards to climate change, and life in general, being able to respond to change when you have a house built on a block of land is also quite critical. So in 2004, this is how long ago this part of it started, There's a wonderful quote by Goethe, or it's attributed to Goethe. Whether he actually did write it or not is a bit up in the air. But the thing that always grabbed me about this, and I've applied it many times in my life, and it's true, is that the moment that you commit yourself to something is the moment that things start to fall into place that you didn't really expect would ever happen. And so in regards to the house, it was my partner's 50th, and I took her down to the architect and I said, look, we've had the block of land for about 5 years at the time, I think it was. I said, we need to start this process, and we need to start it fairly soon. Still wasn't really sure how we could afford the architect, but how we were going to afford the house, wasn't really sure how that was going to happen, but once you start down that route. But it was a good year for me. It was probably the first time that I kind of matched the average income in Australia, so I was feeling quite flush with funds for the time there. So that was the start of it, and although there was good and bad experiences, so there are a couple of things that you come in useful. So it's nice having a very supportive partner. That's one of them, and one of the kind of negotiated things that we had at the start when I said that I was going to build it, or as much as possible, was that there wasn't going to be any time frame. And as I was saying to someone before, when they said how does that go, because it's now 6 years since the start of the build, is that whenever anybody asked me, I always said 18 months. And for some reason, 18 months is just long enough for people to think, oh yeah, that's not too far away. And it's just short enough for them to think that it's going to be in the following year, so they don't kind of go, oh, you'll be in it by the end of the year. So it's a really good amount. So that's continued. So if you ask me today, it's about 18 months. I have a really good next door neighbour. That was the guy on the Bobcat there, whose block of land it originally was, who we bought it off of. And of course, I've got a son called Warwick, who just happened to be outside that sign there. It's just near that Central Markets there, and sometimes comes to these events. And he has been really, really useful for me. Like, he has just given so much of his time. I could never pay him back for it. So that's definitely, if you've got a son, it's definitely useful, or a daughter's probably good too. But somebody who's interested in learning, which he is, and it's been good for him too. I'm not saying it's just a one-way street. For his knowledge of building has increased over the years, just as probably mine has as well. So August in 2014, that's pretty much what it looks like at the moment. The only thing different is that flue stack is about 1 stack higher because it was a bit close to that gutter. Now, in the original brief, I knew a little bit about sustainable building. So being interested in permaculture for a long period of time, I kind of had an understanding about north facing and good insulation, collecting water and things like that. But over the last 10 years at working at TAFE, and probably the last 3 or 4, my interest in sustainable building has kind of grown because I teach in this subject as well. And of course, as I'm building at the same time, I'm interested in how things are going to be affected in the build. And it was somewhere in that period of time, probably back in about 2004, that I first read the book by Brendan Robert Vale about the autonomous house. And it's a fairly dry read. It's not a scintillating, it's not full of colour pictures or anything. It's quite a dry read. But it opened up a new concept which I'd never really thought about. So I'd always thought about the house as being sustainable, but when you think about it as autonomous, in the fact that it's like a living thing and it's self-supporting. And so I enjoy their book. I enjoy their book now, probably more than I did at the time, but it most certainly was a way of thinking about houses that I'd never really thought about before. And I mean, and they were practitioners of it as well. They were both architects, but they built this house in, I think it was in Nottingham that they built it. And they built it so that they could see how this worked for them. And so all of the things that they were teaching as architects in the university there, they put it into practice in their house. And by and large, they accomplished pretty much all of what they wanted to do, with a few exceptions, but of course, exceptions are always there for whatever we do. So this block of land that we purchased all those years ago was in Angaston in the Barossa Valley. And it's just under 1 acre. It's about 3,800 square metres all around. When you see the photos of it, the nice thing about the photos is there's hills either side of it, so you kind of get this extended view and you don't really see the roads. It's still in the township, so there is town water and sewage connection there. And because Penrice Road is the main road, we decided to build the house, and it is our actual address road, so Penrice Road is the address road. We were able to build the house furthest up to the back of the property. And that was kind of useful, and first thing that went up was the shed, of course, to store all the stuff in. The other thing that it allowed us to do was to twist it away from the road so that we were facing exactly north. And if you can do that on any block, then you're off to a good start. By and large, orientation will save you much more than having good orientation will save you more money than having bad orientation. So that was near map probably about 3 years ago. Obviously had the roof on, so it might have been four years ago. Can't remember now. So when I said that we went to the architect, it wasn't that we hadn't thought about what we wanted to build on this house. So we had thought about it, and we had, me being the artist person, I'd come up with lots of different sketches for it, and we had a look at them and decided no, it wasn't really any good. And then we go back and have another look at another one. So we came up with this design. Originally it was going to be quite a steep pitched house, and we were looking for a mezzanine area over the top of the 2 bedrooms, because we both had this romantic concept of mezzanine bedrooms, but as you get older and have to lean more, you probably lose that concept out of your drawings. But that was kind of what we came up with. It was pretty good. We'd always wanted to have a composting toilet, so even though it's drawn in there just like a toilet, it was probably always going to be a composting toilet to use. And so in 2004 we went to see the architects, and we gave them our sketches, and that's what the architect came up with. Now I'll be honest, it wasn't a love affair with our architects. It wasn't one of those rosy experiences. It was not a long drawn out process, but it was not a fun process as it could have been, I don't think. I don't know why that was, but it's just how it turned out. So that's why the architect's name is chopped off of that drawing. So our architect, it's a well-known practice, and we had a junior architect did the drawings, came up with the idea of that area there with a mezzanine over the top, hence what you could see on the photo. And because of that, it kind of opened up things. So the composting toilet's on its mezzanine of its own, which was a good idea. The mezzanine above kind of went from the pokey one under the eaves that we were looking at to a much more, almost a room and a bit up the top there, which is okay. It's quite nice space. It's quite warm at this time of year when you've got the heater on, etc. But by and large, it didn't really change a lot from our original plan. Just a couple of extra doors probably in there. And one of the things that you can see is the door that was drawn there, which was probably taken off of my drawing originally. I actually went over into the dining room because I didn't see much point in having the lounge room with another door in it, so that went across. So that was the architect's impressions of it with full height windows, which is one of the things that we disagreed about in the end, and I went for less height windows, which does reduce your solar gain, I won't deny that, but it also allows you to use a whole lot of wall space that you couldn't use otherwise. And that's what it looks like from the north and west, so you can kind of see what I changed. One of the advantages in teaching people how to use energy programs is you get to run lots of examples on your own house. Tech wanted to have a door on that side as well, and I didn't, so I went. And running energy programs on west-facing walls, if you have no windows on it, it just gives you the best scenario. As soon as you put windows in there, your energy rating goes down quite remarkably, even with paying for expensive glass in it, etc. So that was a cross-section with composting toilet chamber, just to allow access to it. So it's a Clivus Multrum size and the mezzanine there. So in summary, it's just all the things of good passive design. North-facing, no west-facing windows, small windows on the southern side, and most of them are double glazed, and small on the eastern side with a little inlet, little alcove there. Good cross ventilation, both low to high and just through the house, because most of our wind is north-south. We're at the top of a hill there, so the quarry is, where I'm standing is there's a quarry right behind me, although you can't actually see it because there's a hill there. And it seems to funnel up the wind directly through or directly down, so it's really good for that. And lots of insulation. So wall systems, originally the architect wanted reverse brick veneer, and that's all right, I was quite happy with that. But then I learned more about reverse brick veneer, and it's good in certain parts of the house and it's not so good in other parts of the house. So from a house that was completely reverse brick veneer to start with, it ended up being limited to pretty much the east and the west walls were reverse brick veneer, and everything else just was extra insulation. So the original structure was just standard 90mm pine studs, And then when I decided to negate the other, the brick veneer along those walls, I added another 70mm layer of studs in there with insulation as well. So insulation-wise, it's about R4 in that walls, plus of course you've got the weatherboard and the plasterboard that adds a little tiny bit. That's the west wall, so that's the other side of that west wall in the kitchen. We both liked this kind of old style brickwork, and so we bought some from the Red Brick Company, and I had a bricklayer come in and lay that. That's the only kind of structural part of it that I didn't do, is that. It's much nicer to do it. And a reverse brick veneer with the concrete slab, so that's not quite polished there, it's just got a bit of linseed oil on it at the moment, but it will be polished over the top of that, is a really good absorber of heat for balancing out the temperature in your home. And of course if your slab is tinted, then it gives it a bit better. So when the original pour came, we just had a little bit of black oxide sprinkled over it. That's the little alcove on the eastern side. And as the builder of this house, that was a cursed thing to actually do. It was just so much detailing, trying to get this little 900 by 600, I think it is, space in there and detail it for the plasterboard. And there's 2 windows in that space as well, which you can't see from this side. It does, however, give you on that back bedroom, which is on the south side, a little bit of winter sun in the early morning in winter time. So it's kind of probably worth it for that. Now that was the southern side of the house, but since I took that photo, which was about maybe a year and a half ago, I have got next door neighbours there now who are much quicker at building their house and almost completed theirs. But they probably didn't have as much fun as I had. So that's the dining room. We only had the power put on about probably 4 weeks ago, maybe 5, which then made it kind of habitable. So we have been staying up there on the weekends since then. Because one thing that composting toilets need is a perpetual fan to make them work. So when you haven't got power, it's pretty hard for that fan to buzz around. The bathroom's quite small because the toilet's separate, so it was just big enough to get a bath in and a vanity unit, and a novel use of a set of stairs there, a set of steps. This is the mezzanine bedroom upstairs. So the mezzanine bedroom upstairs originally had, I think the architect had a cupboard. This is the composting toilet, it's right there. That's the wall of the composting toilet. Originally I think had a cupboard over the top of it. But when the grandkids came up and looked at it, they go, "Oh, I want to sleep up there." And as it turned out, it was exactly the same size as a single bed, so it's been fitted out for them to sleep up there if they want to. So a long time ago, when I first started working at TAFE and was looking for a sustainable house for some of my assignments that I was delivering in, I was looking through all these American books, and it was like trying to find one. A lot of American, particularly north of North America, have much bigger west-facing windows. Plus, when you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun, although it still rises in the east, it rises in the opposite side to what it does here, so it's very hard to convert houses. But we did have an illustrator at work, and he drew up my house. I said, "You may as well do mine. It's been designed as a sustainable one." So he ended up doing mine, so I got to benefit from that illustration and use it in these type of presentations. So the good things about it is there's really good airflow from, you can see from the low side to the high side. Because of that mezzanine, it's continuous through there. And most of the winds, it's only about 2 rooms deep, so there's quite good airflow even on the ground level from south to north and north to south. The eaves, originally the architect had the eaves a lot deeper because her windows went right down to the ground, and so when I pulled the windows up to about 1/3 of the height, I reduced the eaves accordingly. But pretty much you can see that I get no summer sun probably until pretty much the equinox is starting to come through the windows. So that was winter solstice, sun coming through. And we also get sunlight coming through those high windows as well, which you can see on one of them. And those glass block walls which shine through into that back room, they give you a nice tinted, tainted, reflective glow through there, so it's quite pretty. So that was the equinox, so there's still a little bit of sun just starting to come through at the equinox, which is what you're after. And for, part of the original plan was for a pergola with vines on the north side anyway, so that will happen sometime. So some of the other things about bringing a house, being more autonomous, is having rainwater. And because we were only up there on weekends, I ended up with concrete rainwater tanks, which were quite expensive and probably not too environmentally friendly, but we've got 45,000 litres altogether. We have got mains water to the house. The rainwater tanks are not pumped into the house at the moment. But as part of my permaculture design, I was looking at strategies for getting water into the orchard as well. And on the orchard side of the road, it sits probably about half a metre below the road, so there's a fair volume of water that comes through there. And although we do have a creek that runs through there, it's a stormwater creek, so you can't really capture too much off of that. But I do have a plan for the future for that one. So the swales come into the orchard and recharge the subsoil, and you can see where the green area is in summertime of how much water goes into that. And then of course in the house, composting toilet, which uses no water, and then low flow fittings. And one of the compromises getting the composting toilet through the council was the fact that originally I wanted to have a grey water leach field into the orchard, but they weren't very happy about that. So we agreed to disagree on that, and then I said, well, mainly I'm after the composting toilet. The grey water, you have options of what you want to do with that in a future time. So I said, okay, I'll agree to give you the grey water to help your stead system flow down to the sewage farm if you give me okay to have the composting toilet. And I was like, yes, got that one through. And then of course you've got to deal with the Department of Health. So the Department of Health are very pro composting toilets, but you have this kind of back and forth ping pong match between them and the council. But it's in. So they're the water tanks, rye tanks. That's what the composting toilet looks like in Australia. They use some countries use a fiberglass, but over here it's more of a plastic, quite thick, quite dense plastic. And it does have an overflow drain just in case you need it into the stead system, common system. That's what it looks like now. They still have to get some flashing on there. That is how they work if you've never seen one before. So essentially they don't really compost, there's no real heat there. It's filled up, about 2/3 of that container is filled up just with leaf mulch and compost. And then all that happens is that the human waste feces just dries out on the top. And once it dries out, it doesn't create very much volume at all. In fact, humans are kind of like the worst in regards to volume. You wouldn't be able to fertilise very many gardens with human waste. You're much better off getting a cow or a horse. But unfortunately, we flush it out to sea with many litres of water, so it looks like we have a big volume of waste. So in the insulation, it was just to building code originally. It was just, I think it was R3.5 or something in the ceiling. So I went for, and summer and winter is different here, so it's a R4 batt plus a reflective foil, which gives it an extra R2 in summertime, and it doesn't really matter that much in winter because it has to get through the R4 in the first place. The brick veneer walls have got R2.5, and we, for personal reasons, we just decided to go for a spray foam around the whole exterior of the house, and that's worked out quite well. So that reverse brick veneer wall with the red bricks has got 2 air spaces plus plasterboard in between those 2 air spaces, plus the brickwork on the inside. Most of the rest of it has just got double studs with no air spaces. That gives an R4 insulation. One of the things about learning how buildings go, when I first started this, it was double glazing or e-glazing. E-glazing was just relatively new in Australia, and I thought, oh, it's e-glazing, it must be good. So I got e-glazing to all of the downstairs windows and double glazing to all of the upstairs windows. Probably, if I had to do anything again on that, I probably would be thinking about changing some of that, but that's just how it goes. You're just kind of stuck with it. And it has got a bit of a tint in the windows as well. So probably going to benefit more in summer than in winter. It's not that it's cold in winter, but it's probably coolish. But if climate change keeps going, I'll be winning there. And one of the things that I got from the passive house movement was the sealing of frames and windows, which we do fairly poorly in Australia. So all of my stud work is sealed to the slab. All of my windows are sealed to the stud-work, both with house wrap and also seals. So there's not going to be much air movement through that. I did get a 1.5 kilowatt PV system on there. That's on the shed, which you might have noticed. I'm not sure. I can't remember whether you see that or not. And an evacuated tube hot water system from Stratco's. The wood-fired stove was originally going to be part of it, but my plumber talked me out of it, so it isn't. It's just there as a heating and cooking unit. And I did install, which you probably can't see on any of those, but I did install a fan to move warm air from the high mezzanine level back down into the kitchen. And that was just one of those things that I just kind of dreamt up and thought it sounded good. So that's the PV system. That's kind of like the solar hot water system. And there's the stove, and that's the fan. It's a Aerotron, I think it's the company that do the fan. It's quite low energy use, and they seem to have pretty good references online. And of course the stove is a Nectar, which is just a local one. So as for the land that surrounds this house, which is why the house kind of came out of the land, the orchard's probably got about 50 fruit trees. We've got this interplant with leguminous trees such as Tagasaceae and some acacia species. We've got vegetable gardens running through the rows, so they're about 1.5 metres wide. They run probably about 20, 30 metres of vegetables. And there are some swales on the orchard because occasionally you do get really heavy downpours. I was lucky enough to be up there one day when it gave us 24 mil in about 30 minutes. And it looked like, even though it's a sloping block, it looked like a lake. And there's a small portion up the back of the block where I've got about 10 eucalypts that I'm going to, some are a bit older than others, but coppice for use in the fire. And that's looking at the orchard towards the north, a bit more towards the northeast, and a bit further towards the east. And as you can see, that's the quarry wall in the background, so it looks like it's a giant estate, but where the road is where it finishes. It's quite good. So that was the land use strategies, which, like I say, was all part of the story. When I run this through First Rate 5, I got originally in the old program, I got about 7.8, but they tightened up their program and it dropped down to 7.5. But theoretically, if you, I always think if you get to about 7.5 to 10 stars, you probably have an option of whether you want to heat it or cool it or not. So it looks at airflow, it looks at design, orientation, insulation, etc. That's what it physically looks like when you do a run off of it. And the weather for data, which the First Rate 5 program uses, is same as Mildura, which is kind of funny, but that's what they reckon it is. And they have got 40 years of weather data that backs it up. So products used. We use cypress cladding for the exterior and colour bond. The cypress is a native Australian species which is white ant resistant. Just used pine studs from the hardware. Some of my interest in this was not so much in the more interested in the product being available for most people. So most of my stuff came from hardwares except for that cedar. Hardwares or local businesses. We used Termimesh. We used LVLs for pretty much everything that's supporting a roof structure, and Western Red Cedar windows for the downstairs and e-glazing, and then upstairs we used aluminium mainly for lower maintenance. Plasterboard was just gyprock, and we used a combination of, I don't think I had any shots of the eastern wall, but on the western wall it was just recycled from Little Red Brick Company, and I had this moment where I thought I might use a whole heap of timbercrete blocks, but as nice as they are, they're extremely heavy to lug around. And then the spray foam was insul foam, and then Earthwall. Earthwall do have some credentials with their recycled glass bats. And for keeping the VOCs down with all the rest of it, so we use byproducts for the slab and for any timber work, interior and exterior, and Porter's water-based paints, which we get from, I think it's Paint Central on Dawes Road, supplied us with most of those. And that is about it. Pleasure.